Carmi's journey led her to realize that proper saddle fit is often overlooked. Many horses are in a great deal of pain from poor fitting saddles. Carmi is a saddle fitting expert whose articles appear in Chronicles of the Horse and Trailblazer magazines. She also lectures in functional anatomy at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. Today's topic is saddle fit, technology versus tradition. So please welcome Carmi Weininger.
Thanks, Joy. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out so early. I'll try to keep you awake in your seats. And I hear we're competing with Chris Cox, so doubly grateful that you're here. We're going to talk about saddle fit, some of the basic issues of fit. I'm going to refer a little bit to talks I did over the past 2 days. I see a couple of you have been in the audience already, so hopefully it won't be too repetitive. Just to flesh out what Joy said, I run a business called ReactorPanel Saddle Company. We have a booth here. And I got into the saddle industry completely by accident, and I got into it at the time as a horse trainer with a barn full of horses under my care, thinking they were in really good shape and their coats were glossy and their feet were perfect and they had the right bits and they were turned out and conditioned and groomed and their backs were a bloody mess, but I didn't know it. And I found that saddle fitting is the most under-taught element of horse management, that we've all been to lectures on bits and conditioning and grooming. And if you've had a talk on saddles, it's been from somebody almost certainly trying to position you towards a certain product instead of trying to give you information that demystifies saddle fit and lets you go home and help your horse. So we're going to try to do some of that today. Get my little pointer. I just wanted to highlight that my mission is to continue to learn. I'm an information junkie. I study every chance I get. I try to give myself a course a year in continuous education, do a lot of reading, and work with the horses who are my best teacher. I'm a biomechanics student, I guess somewhat of a teacher. And I ride dressage currently, though in the past I've done eventing, hunter jumper, I've done an endurance race. You know, if a horse does it, I've tried it. So the foundation principles of this talk is that saddle fit is an essential component, but it's just one component of bringing your horse into balance. That balance promotes optimal performance. And a point I made yesterday I'd like to make again today. Every step your horse takes out of balance is a step toward unsoundness, and saddles cause a lot of imbalance issues in horses. So what we're going to get in today a little bit is some of the art of saddle fitting is the knowledge that you have about a horse. It's using your hand and eye. It's a soft process. It takes years to develop. The hard science of saddle fit is instantly available to everybody. That's measuring tools to shape your horse, and it's pressure data you can gather by riding your horse with a pad under the saddle. And we'll get into that near the end. But if you combine this years of skill with the modern tools, you can do some good. So we're going to talk about some basic saddle fitting techniques, measuring devices, and some of the myths that I found in saddle fitting that get us all messed up, and most of them involve our hands. This talk is for you, so if I go too fast, slow me down. If you have a question at any point about your own horse, your own body, your own saddle, just raise your hand. I'd love to hear from you so that you have a valuable takeaway from this session. Kerry Ridgway is a lecturer. He was the one who taught the first saddle fitting course I ever took. He's still an active vet and teacher. And he made this statement, which I thought was provocative when I heard it 15 years ago, which is, let's start with the assumption that the saddle doesn't fit. What do you mean? And since then, in the work I do, I've done a lot of pressure testing, and I've found about 80% of the saddles I test don't fit. About 90% of the owners are unaware they have a problem. And that's the gap between reality and perception. 80% of saddles don't work. 90% of owners think they're just absolutely fine. And the reason is the horse is genetically wired to not show pain. The one that's obviously limping is the first one that gets picked off and eaten. So most of our horses will go through such amazing amounts of pain and just tolerate it on our behalf. I think we have a moral imperative to get to the bottom of it and fix it. And I got committed to not being a hobby saddle fitter, but a real saddle fitter. The time I was helping somebody I'd watched her loping around, and her horse was tossing his head and swishing his tail, and we pulled her saddle off, and the withers were bloody. And she should have been lying on the ground, but she wasn't. And that's what most of these horses will do for us. And that's why I think this information is so important for you and for them, for your horses. So, I also want to just hit the elephant in the room. I have something called alopecia. My hair fell out 5 years ago. It's not cancer. It's not choice. I'm not squeamish about it. You can ask me about it later if you're curious. Just is. So, let's start with how the horse has to balance and move to do his job. Each of these horses are wearing saddles. The saddle has to give the rider a very different way to move with the horse. If you're doing dressage, and that's me a couple years ago. If you're reining, if you're doing endurance, if you're jumping, if you're playing on the prairie. I'm not sure if this was accidental or on purpose, but it looked like so much fun when I put it in. Or, you know, if you're out in the desert, starting to just contemplate, why do we saddle? What's the saddle supposed to do? What is it supposed to do for us? What's it supposed to do for our horses? And we'll look at that again more. So the first thing I want to start with is having you ask yourself the question, is my horse in pain? And I just made a provocative statement about how much horses will tolerate without showing that they're in pain. And I found, after I took my inadvertent soil sample lying on the arena floor, watching my horse gallop away and going, how did she do this to me? That her back was in so much pain that if you touched her in the right way, she dropped 3 inches. But I didn't know how to do that. I wasn't finding it in my daily grooming. So I'll show you a couple of things, but mainly you can easily find somebody to teach you to palpate your horse's back and, you know, learn the difference between a painful reaction. I'll show you where saddle-related pain is likely to be in the horse's back. We repeat our test 3 times because some horses are just sensitive and you touch them and they flinch. It doesn't mean it hurts. And we also have to remember a really important tool you can use is the behavior when a horse is saddled and unsaddled. Put them in the round pen, do a routine, throw your saddle on, do the same routine. If their willingness to do transitions, if their willingness to move freely forward changes when that tack's on their back, you're getting information. So let's get a little technical. The trapezius and thoracic rhomboid. Trapezius is the main muscle that's at the front where your saddle sits. The rhomboid is more up the neck, but the back part, the thoracic part of the rhomboid muscle, sometimes gets a little bit of pressure from your saddle. Different palpation techniques reveal different issues. The neuroreflexive response is something that causes literally a knee-jerk reaction, as though a doctor tapped you with a hammer and a kick. You have no choice but to have a reflex. There's certain areas in the horse's back which will exhibit a neuroreflexive response. If you take your fingernails and go along the back, they will all dip. Some vets check backs that way. It's a mistaken technique. I think it's ignorance. I don't think it's desire. But some saddle fitters may show you a little something that's not there. So learning how to use the pad, the first knuckle of your finger, to press on the horse in various ways, and in between the intercostal spaces, in between the ribs, vertebra tips up here. Super good idea to hire somebody once to do maybe a massage on your horse and show you how to look at your horse's back, because then you have information and technique you can continue to use. Is all this making sense? Am I, yeah? All right, questions? You're good? Okay. So let's look at some of these painful sites. Atrophy is very common on horses. Atrophy means the tissue is damaged enough that it's sunken. It's no longer robust muscle. Atrophy commonly happens where this green star is. Most horses who have saddle pain have it in that area. Most horses who have saddle damage have it in that area. Some horses have muscular tension in that area, and it's not a poorly fitting saddle. It's just a result of their head carriage using those muscles at the base of the neck. Most horses really love it if you massage right here once a week. I encourage you to do that. It doesn't take very much time. You can use your knuckles or your thumbs, depending on how sensitive your horse is. Some horses get pain. It's actually a little higher than this red splotch, parallel to the spine and just beneath, We are supposed to sit over that muscle. The longissimus dorsi muscle is a big sheet muscle that runs down the back. And if our saddle pushes into that muscle instead of sliding over the top, you may find damage in the long back muscle. And when it's advanced damage, there'll be a trough. Like if that horse were standing out in the rain, his back would catch water. Amazingly, once you do, we'll call a remedial fit around the atrophy, these horses regenerate tissue sometimes in 6 weeks. So you can get around a lot of really bad problems if you find them and address them. Not always, but often. This is a little less common. It used to be when the purpose of the horse changed from utility to convenience, from function to sport. Our saddles got to be less a matter of the horse must carry the soldier down the road for 12 hours today to the horse needs to jump around really prettily in the ring while I'm comfortable in my inner thigh. So stirrup bars got set more and more and more in so that the rider's inner thigh was really comfortable, and a lot of horses for a lot of years went around with damage right here. There still is an issue though that gets a horse in the same place. I mean, now we're designing saddles wider and riders are not really suffering so much and horses are happier. But the interesting thing, I encourage you all to go home and pet your horse like this. Put your hand where the front of your saddle goes, watch the angle of your hand, and run your hand back along the part where your saddle sits and you'll see your hand twist and flatten. Every horse's back twists. The twist of the saddle is literally the place where your horse's back twists. Horses' backs twist differently from each other, and saddles twist differently from each other. And if your horse's back doesn't twist where your saddles twist, that will be a gotcha place. That's a provocative point. Did you all get that? I saw a few nods, but I didn't see the whole room nodding. Out there? Okay? Okay. So what are some other things you can look at? Uneven sweat patterns, yes, if you have some other signs. Sweat alone is generally not a good indicator of fit unless it's a vastly different pattern on the left and the right, or you find a dry spot about the size of my hand or smaller. That's often a high pressure spot. This it's easier to see today because it's cloudy, but I know that you're having a hard time seeing my slides. This horse has really weird dry streaks in the sweat there and here, and white hair here. So, really interesting to contemplate how the horse moves. I ride dressage today, and I got taught and believed for a long time that we were simply trying to have the horse move like he would move at liberty. And that's not true. And you know, watch a reiner, watch a Western pleasure horse, watch an upper level dressage horse or a gaited horse. We are improving, at least we think we are, on the natural movement. We certainly are developing muscular strength for them to sustain a sort of movement that's man-caused and man-related. It's not the horse's idea to do some of these things. So we need to eliminate the restriction of the saddle so we can do this thing we're all trying to do with our horse, even if it's just to have them go comfortably down the trail. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's an interesting proposition. So balance and posture have to be contemplated when you look at your saddle. The carriage of the horse's neck changes the shape of the back. The higher the head, the broader the base of the wither. So if you're fitting a saddlebred, you got to jack their head up before you measure their back. If you're fitting a Western pleasure horse, you should have the head down by the knees before you measure the back, because you'll get a different shape. And this horse, I don't know if you can see on the slide, when his head position isn't even very different here, but when it's natural, there's a short, steep wither, and then a contour to his back. And when his head's up, the wither is longer and slopier, and then there's more of an angle than a contour. It's a subtle difference, but it's two different shapes. And imagine if in this picture his head were even lower. I'll let you go there in your minds. It's really important to saddle the shape that you actually ride, and not a shape that you wish your horse would be someday. You know, allow room for that if that's where you're going to go. Really interesting point here about balance and about movement and about stance. So you look at the way this young green horse stands, and we get on and ride, and you know, we need to hopefully limit our weight on the horse to 20% of the horse's body weight. That's the accepted formula that they can carry. Interestingly, It's cowboy myth forever. 20% of the horse can carry 20% of his weight. And now the universities have done force plate shear studies, muscle density tissues, and said the horse can carry 20% of our weight, of his weight. So it's true. But the young and green horse, that's a lot of weight. He needs to shift his neck to find a different balance. He does need to be a bit on the forehand to carry our weight. And we then strengthen the horse with riding and exercise so that when he's mature and properly trained, he can maintain or even improve on his natural balance while we're on top and he's carrying our weight. The process takes a lot of years. There's no quick fixes for that. Just strength and repetition. And having a saddle that might need to change as your horse changes shape that dramatically. Being aware that everything changes. So different breeds have different fitting challenges. I put these horses up. Here's a warm blood who's level. Her wither and her croup are the same height. This thoroughbred is uphill. This quarter horse is downhill. And that by uphill it means the wither is higher than the croup. The wither is lower than the hip. And this little Icelandic guy is just a challenge in a whole lot of ways. The other thing is the girth groove. And I didn't have time to put a really good girth slide in here, so I'm just going to talk it to you. Where the horse gets narrowest is where your girth or cinch will go. It's just physics. It doesn't matter where you put it. Another myth is that you put it one hand behind the elbow. No, you put it where it's going to go. So on a horse like this, there's a big wide flat spot. On a horse like this little Icelandic, I don't know if you can see clearly, his narrowest part is in his armpit, right behind his elbow. If the rigging on your saddle or your billeting system doesn't permit you to girth neutrally, meaning the force needs to be straight up and down, not diagonal. If you're diagonal, and you can see it on this horse, I think that he's got marks in his coat that tell me he probably gets cinched right here and it goes back here. When your rigging or your cinch or your girth is diagonal, the pressure of your saddle is going to be forward towards the wither, could make a spot of pressure, or your saddle will get dragged forward so it's over your girth. One of two things will happen. The way to avoid that is to have a rigging that's very center on a horse like this, or a billeting system with a point billet, a very forward billet. So these are some slides I did yesterday, but such an interesting vantage point. I wanted you guys to see them again, if you're here again, or see them for the first time. We don't often get up behind our horses on something and look down at the back, but when we do, and I'm sorry it's so dim in here, you can see the shape of their spine, you can see the way their barrel curves away, you can see the outlines of their shoulders, and you can get a sense of how straight they are or aren't. I'm giving a little bit away here. So let me just go right to the next slide. This horse has a lot more barrel on the right than the left. He's much more developed on one side than the other. You might not, this horse's owner didn't know this. You don't necessarily know this unless you look from these new vantage points, taking information from a new source. This horse's spine curves. He has a bit of scoliosis. This horse has wildly uneven shoulders. This one bulges with a big hollow behind and has a steep angle. This one has a much flatter angle with much more tissue behind. So this, which of these horses will be easiest to saddle successfully is a trick question. You can't fit a horse successfully until you know who rides the horse, what body issues that rider has, what saddle they're using, and if the saddle is symmetrical. So looking at these twisted shapes of horses, knowing they need to carry a saddle, you need to see if their issues are compounded by the rider or compensated for by the rider. And that involves getting the saddle and the rider before you finish the story. Any questions about any of this? Yeah?
I have a question regarding, you had said in a previous clip in your PowerPoint about the dry patches. Like, what would be a solution to that?
Okay, question is, dry patches, what would be a solution? Would the pad be part of the solution for a dry patch? You first have to understand why you have dry patches in your sweat. You can have dry patches because you have uneven contact under the bottom of your saddle. You can have dry patches because your horse hasn't broken into a big sweat. One pattern that's common is a big dry spot in the middle with sweat at the front edge, sweat at the back, sweat under your calf, sweat probably under your girth or cinch. Some people think that means the saddle is bridging, putting pressure in the front and back. It's usually not. It just means you haven't had a big sweat yet. So if you have a dry patch, I'll get to pressure testing a little later, and my first recommendation, if I weren't on the spot to help you look at your horse, would be to do a pressure test and see if the dry spots are a result of high pressure. Once you identify the source of the problem, then you can start coming up with solutions. If you're very lucky, it's as simple as a saddle pad change, and if you're not, it's a saddle change. Or a horse change. Get rid of the horse. Dry spots. I don't want to be. He doesn't sweat. Right, right. So that makes it harder, and that makes more of it. She says her horse doesn't sweat much. She has a lot of endurance and can go all day. So you need other tools, other signs for the sweat. Thank you. Good question. And anyone at any time, it is jump and shout. I'm listening. Yeah. So the question is, a horse with uneven shoulders. This question is, you've noticed that many of your horses have a bigger left shoulder. Why? Horses, just like people, are not ambidextrous. They're one-sided. They're either right side dominant or left side dominant. More horses are left side dominant. That's why racehorses run left. It's the lead that more of them will naturally take, but not all. We try when the horses are young to figure out which is the dominant side, and through strengthening, conditioning, exercises, bring them into a more even balance. We can often straighten the crooked horse through a combination of therapy and riding. The times we can't are when it's a skeletal, it's an injury, it's a club foot. A club foot or a high heel, low heel syndrome will always give you a shoulder asymmetry, 100% of the time. You can go at it a little bit with farrier techniques, but you can't ever end it. And you don't necessarily have a problem. You know, the first thing I do when I see any of these three horses is put the saddle on, watch the rider from the back, and watch the rider from the front, and see if the saddle's going over to one side or not. It isn't always a case that the saddle is off and the shoulders are a problem. Sometimes. Does that help? Yeah. I mean, it's just the way they're made. They are what they are. And the more you do, we do a lot of endurance horses in my business that go down the trail with riders who haven't had a lot of education, who maybe post on one diagonal for 4 or 5 hours, and boy are these horses crooked. Thank you. The experiment that she did for a year was to get on and off her horse on the right side only, and the shoulders evened up on this horse. We do a lot of damage by mounting from the ground and by mounting from the left. Each time we get up there, we pull our saddle against the horse's wither, and we tweak our saddle, we tweak the tree over time, we make a misshapen lump, and we hurt our horses. Even if we don't mean to, you cannot get up from the ground over and 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 have left stirrup without putting uneven pressure. So getting on from both sides, you know, getting on from the ground keeps us alive a lot of times. We might need to do it, but rotating sides, and I got this from some of my endurance customers, and I'll tell you, the first time I put my right foot in the stirrup, this leg was like, you want me to what? But it learns, you know, yours will too. Thank you, good questions. So here's another new vantage point. What does your horse look like from the back? And it can be really useful to just go take this snapshot and do it. I've done with this horse, because you look and you see some things, but then draw some lines on it. Follow his spine. Whoa, it's not straight. Draw a plumb line down through the middle of his tail and see how much of it is close to one hind leg and how much is close to the other. Look at this, pelvis is tilted. So this little guy's got some issues. And again, the rider doesn't know about it. The rider doesn't ever get back behind him. Who does? How many of you have ever gotten back behind your horse and looked at him like that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A bunch, actually, a good number of you Congratulations. And you learned something you weren't used to seeing, didn't you? We're usually looking at the legs. Yes, we're usually looking at the legs, so take a look at everything else. The tops of the points of the hips, the angle of the pelvis. Yeah, good. So what might happen to his saddle is highly unlikely in this case that the saddle is going to sit in the middle of that horse. It's unlikely that he's going to carry it straight or that he's going to move straight. And sometimes when I see a horse that's really, I need to see him move, a lot of times I'll decline to saddle a horse until some of these issues are looked at therapeutically, or at least till there's a sign-off by a vet or a body worker that the horse is fit enough to saddle. So, saddle position. Just putting your saddle in the wrong place will hose up everything. Imagine a shoe with an arch support that's set a 1/4 inch too far forward. A couple hours later, your foot's in agony. That arch support is not helping you out. If you put your saddle in the wrong place, it's as though, you've gotten a badly fitting saddle. No matter how well it fits, if it's in the wrong place, it's not so good. One of the things we look at is this myth that, how many of you have been told, put the saddle 2 fingers behind the scapula? Lots of you. And then when we do that, we think we're out of the way of the shoulder. I mean, it's like a if-then consequence. I put it behind the shoulder, my horse is free in the shoulder. But what really happens, I have this on video in my booth if you guys want to come and see the video. You look at the curve of the back of the scapula, you look at 2 fingers back, which is the red line, and you put the front edge of your saddle there. Then do this at home with your horses. Have somebody take the front leg and just pull it forward like the horse is in a trot stride. You're not doing a shoulder stretch. You're just taking the front leg forward. And watch what happens. The bulge of the scapula will travel back behind the plane of the front of your saddle on every single horse that I've ever seen. There's probably something out there that has a frozen shoulder. And where it travels will vary from horse to horse. On some horses, the scapula kind of pokes up here. On some horses, there's a muscular bulge in the middle. On some, it's the serratus muscles down low. The whole shoulder girdle comes back. But you need to know how your horse's shoulder moves so you know where your saddle needs to have an open pocket to permit that shoulder rotation. If your saddle doesn't have that open pocket, every single time your horse takes a stride, they'll ram their saddle into the tree and eventually slide it under, or not. Maybe they'll just walk like this. And a big place you can test saddle fit and shoulder freedom is get your horse and ride downhill. Go down a hill and you'll learn a lot. Now, there is the case when you go downhill and your horse is restricted that there's front foot pain or hock pain. So I don't want to tell you it's 100% saddle, but it's likely. It's one of the tests I give customers all the time. Go downhill, tell me what happened. Is it possible to put your saddle that far back behind this yellow line? No. So you have to have an open pocket in the way that you fit your saddle. Any questions on this? So here's another myth. The gullet should be 3 fingers wide. So the reality is your gullet needs to be wide enough for your horse's spine and your horse's spinous processes, which are the little tips of the vertebrae that stick up from each rib. And the way you find that is you put your fingers on top of your horse's spine together and you push down, it'll feel hard, and you slowly open your fingers until you get down into soft tissue. And then your fingers are approximating how much room your horse needs for those spinous processes. This is my horse in my hand, and you can see that that's about 4 or 5 of my fingers that my horse needs for her saddle. That's not 3. So then, staying with her, this is a slide I did yesterday, but I think it's important to understand where the horse can carry our weight, because what we want to do is put as much weight as we can over this entire area once we know what it is. So they can carry our weight starting behind the scapula. They can carry our weight starting on top of this long back muscle I mentioned before, below the spinous processes, and we found out just in the last slide where the top edge of where this horse can carry weight is. The forward of the last true or fixed rib means you go to the back of the ribs, feel this back one, go forward 2 ribs, follow the curve to the top, and at or above the rib attachments. And the rib attachments are where you feel the rib cage start to swell out. On some horses it's dramatic. It's as dramatic as here's the back and there go the ribs. And those horses, you got to be careful about fitting around the rib cage. Other horses, there's such a continuous curve to their barrel, you don't really know where the ribs are. But the weight should stop before you're getting onto the bone. the weight-bearing surface of your saddle. Any questions on that? It's pretty clear. So what's your job? These are the things I think each of you can do for your own horse. If you're not already, you can learn to do them pretty quickly with minimal tools. Locate and chart any asymmetries that your horse has. We've given you some vantage points. We'll give you some more before we're done. Figure out if your horse has existing pain. It's amazing how many have pain we don't know about. And it's pretty worth it getting a good body worker to come and go over your horse at least once and help you understand what issues you might have that you don't know about. Because when you fix them, I just want to tell you it's worth it. Understand your horse's history and fitting issues. There's some horses who have conformational challenges. Yesterday's whole talk was about those low-withered, high-withered, curved spine, asymmetrical horses. But if you have one of those, you've got a series of extra challenges. We talked about movement and balance. Well, how old is the horse? What are your goals? And I suggest, if you don't already, you designate a team. Your team has maybe your vets, maybe a body worker, maybe a trainer, maybe a friend who's really knowledgeable who you trust, maybe your farrier. But let the team know what your issues are with your horse. Call them in to work cooperatively with each other. Kind of like the Mayo Clinic. When people start talking to each other, your horse benefits. I often go and work with vets or body workers when I have a tough case. I had one recently, a lump in the back I'd never seen before, and I asked to come out when the vet came to do the ultrasound, and this horse had a fractured L1. The first lumbar vertebrae had a fracture at the tip. So I got a lot of knowledge out of that, and I was able to work with the vet on creating a special gullet channel for a horse that needed a therapeutic saddle fit. Yeah. Body worker, what do I mean? You know, body worker is this term that means people who manipulate the horse's body with their hands. It can be a chiropractor, it can be a massage therapist. There are people now who do Reiki, who do equine structural integration. The main thing I would say, if you're contemplating body work on a horse who hasn't had it, and it's not all woo-woo, it's actually going to do some good, get references from people who've had a good experience. And you want to work with somebody who makes progress with your horse, who doesn't just come and take your money every couple weeks, or 2 or 3 sessions. So identify the issues that you have when you start. Just meet with the body worker and write them down. And just assess, are they getting better? Is what you're hearing and what you're seeing jiving? There are lots of people doing lots of techniques. Some of them are really efficacious, really functional, really work. Some, maybe not as much. Thanks. All right, what do we want the saddle to do? Oh, sorry, question.
As one of those body workers, don't have me out once a year and tell your vet you're having work. I do a lot, but don't lie to your vet about me. That's going to make him think I don't do any good.
Good point, good point. And if you have a body worker who you respect, who gives you a regime for your horse and you don't follow it, then you haven't given that system a chance. I back you up on that 100%.
That happens so often.
Yeah.
I hear the television from the next consultant that, oh, we have massage therapy. I know I've seen that horse 6 months ago.
Right. And in that person's mind, your job too is to educate. Somebody who has massage once a year may think their horse has massage therapy. Muscles change. I got the biggest education of my life many years ago when I was young, and I had a boyfriend who did decathlons. I've never seen anyone need so much massage in my life. And he was in a prime, 23 years old, prime condition, super fit, all kinds of muscle knots and body aches. And boy, did he need to be worked on. So it helped me understand the more athletic we are, the more robust and healthy, perhaps the more care we need. So I marvel at this, that we take a curved, contoured horse, and then we take us with our nether regions that are of various shapes and sizes, and we put something in between the two of us when both of us are moving. A saddle has a lot of responsibility, an enormous amount of responsibility. We want it to stay in the middle of the horse's back and not go off to the side. We want it to distribute our weight. If you do anything that requires you getting up in your stirrups, we really want it to distribute our weight. Or if we're on the heavier side, it's got some missions. We want it to support you well doing the kind of riding that you've chosen to do. We want it to allow the horse the freedom of movement and athletic ability to do his job well. And we wanted to let us communicate with the horse. It's amazing how much a saddle can transform your ability to talk to the horse, to enhance your communication, or to just shut it down. So this is a slide, and hopefully you can see it today. Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, this lady in the front has a large horse and a small saddle, smaller saddle, a Western saddle, but a big paint horse, and she's saying it was suggested to her recently that she get a bigger saddle to distribute weight over a bigger area of the horse's back. When we go back to the slide I showed you a few minutes ago about the area available to bear our weight, it's true that maximizing coverage of that area is the best way to lower pounds per square inch. It's just math. The more area that has our weight, the lower amount of weight is on each inch of that area. However, you need to be riding the saddle that fits you. And if your body weight dictates this size saddle, and someone tells you get that to fit your horse, all of a sudden you're sloppy, you're not communicating, and you're not moving in harmony. So I think it's more complicated answer, but you can certainly try it. If you're having fitting issues, you don't think your pressure distribution is good, and you're willing to move to a saddle that's too big for you because you think it'll be a benefit for your horse, try it. Just make sure you don't buy it until you've tried it. Okay, ankles. Really important to know that I talked to you earlier about going home and petting your horses and finding where they twist. They have two discretely different angles, one here at the wither and shoulder and one in the mid-back. This horse is unusual. Usually the angle at the wither shoulder is steeper than the angle at the mid-back. But if it's not, you need to know it. If you've got a well-sprung shoulder and then the horse is a little rafter-backed, your saddle has to accommodate that. So understanding what the shape of the horse is at the front and the shape of the saddle. I mean, anybody can see that shape doesn't fit that horse. But then this other shape, back here, we don't tend to look at the middle of the back, at the angle from the spine to the rib cage, and be sure that our saddle continues to fit at that part of the horse's back, right there in the center. I love this slide. Back to our gullet. 3 or 4 finger gullet is generous. So here's a saddle, and you can't see this well, but it is exactly 4 finger gullet. And then you put it on the horse's back, and you notice that these panel angles are steeper than this big, broad, flat hoflinger. And what happens? All of a sudden, I don't know if you can see that, I have my whole hand spread out inside. And it's like an 8 finger gullet. What does that mean? It means that all of the rider's weight is being borne on the very outer edges. These panels are digging in to the tissue around his loin. She thinks she has a really beautiful saddle with a generous gullet, and a generous panel, but the panels aren't touching the horse's back. So you cannot assess the gullet width without the horse, and putting it on the horse, and putting your hand inside, and seeing what's touching. And remember, once you get on, the saddle will settle down, the horse's back may come up, it may change, so if you're in doubt, we're about to get to tools, you can pressure test and see. We did pressure test this horse, and we found a really high weight concentration at these outer edges of these panels. Yeah? Yes. Yes. Okay, question was, we're showing a lot of English saddles. She has a gypsy mix and an Aussie saddle. And first point I want to make is all of these fitting principles apply to any saddle. Western, English, treeless, Aussie, you name it. Good fit is good fit. Anybody who's been to other saddle fitting lectures, I hope is hearing resonance, because good fitters say the same stuff. So that's number one. Number two, you don't have this kind of clearance, you don't have a gullet. If you don't have a gullet and your saddle's sitting right down on your horse's spine, you need to create a gullet with saddle pads. But sitting down on the spine is absolutely no. So it's either there and you just haven't found it, or you need to create it. Okay, maximum contact. This is just a fun slide that shows a conventional English saddle's weight-bearing surface, which is really small. You can see the chalk. This is a panel surface on a much larger panel. You can see by the chalk, and you can see the sweat outline matches the chalk outline. So this is a great example of where you want to have your weight-bearing surface, maximizing all of the area available to saddle on the horse's back. And you can see it's below the spine, it's behind the shoulder, it contours up over the swell of the rib cage, and you can't see the ribs, but let's just imagine that's in front of the last true rib. Yes? Yeah? Yeah. Real estate available. Yeah, super point.
So now, yet they still have the same area.
We have a math question. The question is, if you have a 1,200-pound horse that can carry a 240-pound rider, or a 1,000-pound horse that can carry 200 pounds, and they have the same area available to saddle, what happens to PSI, pounds per square inch? And my answer would be, we have no idea, because you got to show me those two horses, and then I have to measure their backs, and see how long that back is or isn't. How long is that horse's rib cage? How wide is his spine? Where's he got his weight?